The silver knife sliced through the cake, and the sound cut the air like a clean wound, and then, with a soft thud, a bright white smear of frosting streaked across Naomi Carter's shoulder, making the entire ballroom freeze for a single horrified second before erupting into sharp, ugly laughter. The sweet, heavy scent of vanilla blended with expensive perfume under the glow of crystal chandeliers, scattering light across the marble floor, and in the center of that storm of humiliation stood a woman as still as a statue, struck by someone else's privilege. Naomi felt the cold cream slide down her collarbone, each line of it coating her skin with a stark white insult. But her face didn't twitch, not a flinch, not even a blink. Only her deep brown eyes, quietly capturing the entire scene like the lens of fate itself. Across from her, Madison Fairbanks, radiant in a wine-red gown with a mocking curl on her lips, lifted the silver knife like a trophy. Just a little joke, no need to be dramatic. She cooed her sweetness, melting into poison. The crowd laughed, not with joy, but with cowardly ease. Some guests covered their mouths, whispering, "Who even invited her? Look at that orange dress, she's far too noticeable." The music faltered, the violin trembling, as if the musician feared the next note. Naomi looked at the rude white streak on her dress, gently swiped a bit with her finger, and lifted it to her eyes. The white against her skin was a cruel reminder of the past, of bias, of the arrogance that always believed it had the right to smear anything on anyone it pleased. But instead of anger, Naomi simply picked up a napkin and wiped it away, each movement slow and precise, as if she were removing a layer of dust someone had tried to throw onto her dignity. The whole room watched every motion, confused by why her silence made the air grow colder with every second. Madison raised her champagne, her voice sharp as a needle. "Maybe next time choose darker colors. White doesn't clean well." Some guests gave awkward laughs, some looked away, some secretly recorded, but something began to shift. A thin thread of unease crept beneath the hollow amusement. No one knew why. They could only feel it. Naomi lifted her head. Her eyes met Madison's, two storms colliding. One fueled by the arrogance of someone convinced she was untouchable. One built on the terrifying calm of someone who knew she held the real power. Not anger, not shame, only calculation. A few guests lowered their phones without realizing it. A violinist hit the wrong note, the air thinned. And then Naomi smiled so slight, anyone could have missed it, but enough to send a chill down several spines. "You're right," she said softly, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "Some things do need to be cleaned up." A heavy silence fell like metal. Madison stalled for a beat. The crowd stopped laughing. A strange tension slithered through the room like mist. Naomi reached for her clutch, opened it, and tapped a single button on her phone. One touch, one signal, one command, one future rewritten. The crowd thought she was texting out of embarrassment. They were wrong. Very wrong. Naomi put her phone away, glanced at the cake that had been turned into a weapon, and whispered just loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "Enjoy your dessert. It will be the last sweet thing you taste." Her words sliced through the air like cold steel, shattering the last remnants of laughter. Some people swallowed hard, others turned aside to hide the shiver running up their spine. Madison, still believing in the world she thought she ruled, only laughed louder, her voice ringing like a crystal glass about to crack. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic." Naomi didn't answer. She rose to her feet. Her orange dress stained with cream, but her posture tall, her steps slow and steady, as if her heels were marking the rhythm of an empire's downfall. When the grand doors closed behind her, the ballroom exhaled, but none of them felt relief. They only felt fear. A silver-haired man whispered, "Do you even know who she is?" No one replied, because they didn't know the most important thing. Naomi did not leave the party in defeat. She left to begin a purge. And every chandelier, every laugh, every person in that room was about to witness a financial storm created by the very woman they had just humiliated. A storm white as the cake, but with destruction, dark as the night swallowing the city outside. The game had begun, and no one in that ballroom realized they had just provoked the wrong person. As the ballroom doors closed behind Naomi Carter, the music resumed, but trembled like an over-tightened string, and the elegant guests began glancing at one another with puzzled eyes, as if they had just witnessed something beyond their ability to explain. Madison Fairbanks still stood in the center of the room, champagne glass in hand, a victorious smile on her lips, but her eyes flickered slightly, as though she sensed a hairline crack forming in the atmosphere. The harder she tried to hold her smile, the more distorted it became. Beside her, a blonde senator's wife leaned in to whisper something that made Madison burst out laughing, but the sound was hollow, hitting the marble floor and shattering like a tired piece of glass. No one followed Naomi. No one stopped her. No one apologized. And that silence became the very first sign of the fear beginning to bloom. A cluster of guests near the wall murmured. She didn't react at all. That's what's terrifying. Another replied. The way she looked at her just now gave me chills. None of them noticed that in the corner of the room, Henry Collins, the aging benefactor, with silver hair like steel, was gripping his wine glass. His gaze locked on the doors Naomi had walked through. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't speaking. He simply stood there, his face draining of color, as if he had just witnessed a meteor plummeting toward the world they thought they controlled. Then he asked quietly, his voice soft but audible enough for the nearby table, "Do you really not know who she is?" The question dropped like a stone. A younger man gave an awkward chuckle. "Some PR guest. Someone's +1," a woman whispered. "Looks like a small-time businesswoman." Henry closed his eyes for a moment, as if defeated by the crowd's profound ignorance. "Her name is Naomi Carter," he said, enunciating every word, the one who runs Carter Capital Partners. The air collapsed. The entire table froze like wax statues. Madison, raising her glass to her lips, lowered it slightly, her fingers trembling. "Carter what?" Henry turned toward her, his eyes heavy as a verdict. "Carter Capital, the largest investor holding decision-making power in the 3 charitable foundations your Fairbanks Foundation depends on." Someone dropped their wine glass, the crash of breaking crystal, jolting half the room. A young assistant stammered, "That's impossible if that's true. Why didn't she say anything?" Henry replied, his voice low and weighted. "People like her never need to say anything." And then the first alarm bell rang, soft, faint, almost harmless, but enough to shatter the illusion of safety. A staff member hurried to Madison's side, his face pale as paper. "Ma'am, the foundation system just flagged temporary lockdown. Several accounts were denied access." Madison let out a laugh louder than necessary, as though drowning out the sound of her heart dropping into her shoes. System glitch. Every gala has a hiccup. But the staff member swallowed hard and whispered, "Ma'am, it's not one account. It's the entire network." The room's atmosphere shifted in color. The violinist struck a harsh, wrong note. One donor stepped out to call his bank. A young woman backed away, hand over her mouth. My God, she didn't leave from shame. She left because she's doing something. Every gaze turned to Madison, the woman who had just thrown cake at one of the most powerful investors on the East Coast. But instead of acknowledging her fear, Madison laughed even louder, clinging desperately to a shell of arrogance that was already splitting apart. You're all being dramatic. She's just some pretender. Henry rose, and before walking away, he left a sentence that froze the entire ballroom. If I were you, I would pray that the tap on her screen was just to answer a message. Because no one in that room realized Naomi had just triggered a chain of capital withdrawal orders worth several $1 billion, a level of power no cake-throwing insult could ever anticipate. From outside the doors, a security officer slipped in, leaning toward the event organizers. There's a group of reporters gathering out front. They say they received an urgent tip about Fairbanks Group. Madison's face drained. What tip, not sure, but they're asking if any major investors left the gala early. Once again, every eye turned toward the doors where Naomi had disappeared 7 minutes earlier. A wave of whispers rippled through the room. It's her. It has to be her. Dear God, we just watched the opening scene of a catastrophe. Madison tried to stand tall, but her calves trembled. She searched the room for support, but instead, people began avoiding her gaze. The same guests who had mocked Naomi earlier were now stepping aside, as if afraid the fallout would reach them. Don't let her scare you, Madison insisted, forcing a smile so strained it gleamed with sweat. She's just one of the most powerful women on Wall Street, a cold voice replied from behind. No one laughed this time. A young waiter who had stood near Naomi earlier whispered, "She told me not to go anywhere, and now I understand why." Madison snapped. What she said, everyone should stay. The whispers spread like a wave. Oh my God, she knew. She planned all of this. A few older men exchanged glances, their faces ashen like witnesses to a collision they could not stop. Then the first notification hit the phones of several guests. Carter Capital Partners, emergency withdrawal, $4.2 billion. A small scream rang out. Henry stood silent. The violinist dropped his instrument. Madison staggered, staring down at her phone as alerts flooded the screen. The message that shattered her arrogance in a single second read, "Fairbanks Group red alert loss of strategic investor." Madison's face turned ghostly white. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering into countless pieces on the floor. Someone whispered, "Tonight the Fairbanks empire begins to fall." And in the grand ballroom, still scented with vanilla from the cake thrown earlier, only one truth hovered above them all. Every mistake has a price, but some prices are far worse than anyone imagines. A cold tremor ran down Madison's spine, and she understood with absolute horror that Naomi had not walked away. Naomi had just begun her counterattack. While the Fairbanks Hotel ballroom was still drowning in chaos, another storm was forming outside, not in the sky, but inside the servers of Carter Capital Partners in Midtown Manhattan. A black Maybach sped down Fifth Avenue, neon lights gliding across its dark windows, like streaks of light, racing over the body of a predator hunting in the night. Inside the car, Naomi Carter sat with her back straight, phone in hand, the glow of the screen reflecting in her deep eyes, where no trace of cake remained, only the absolute focus of someone who knew her power could change the fate of families or destroy an empire within hours. In the front seat, her assistant, Jordan Lee, scanned notifications, eyes widening. All withdrawal orders are being processed. The intermediary funds confirm 30% completed. Naomi, do you want to continue? Naomi did not look up, answering with a calm so cold it was terrifying. Proceed. Every account tied to Fairbanks Group, close. The command was more than an order. It was the sound of cold steel sliding shut over the vault of a dynasty that believed itself untouchable. When they reached Carter Capital headquarters, the 40-story glass tower piercing the Manhattan skyline, the operations team was already waiting. The elevator doors opened, and dozens of eyes turned toward Naomi with a respect laced with fear. Not because of the dress that had been smeared hours earlier, but because they understood the woman standing in front of them was the center of an event that would be written into the financial history of the city. Inside the 38th floor office overlooking the entire New York skyline, Naomi set her bag down and gestured to bring up the main display. More than 20 charts, accounts, and reports filled the wall. One screen glowed red, the unmistakable sign of simultaneous capital withdrawals. Jordan read quickly. Funding from Carter Capital accounts for 42% of the Fairbanks Foundation's total budget. If we pull everything tonight, their entire system will collapse, Naomi said, her voice low and sharp, like the slice of a freshly honed blade. And that is exactly what we need to do. Meanwhile, uptown Madison Fairbanks was rushing from her living room to the conference suite, her silk outfit now wrinkled, her phone vibrating non-stop in her hand. She shouted with a trembling voice she never imagined she could produce. Call Carter Capital. Call them now. Tell them to stop. Why are they doing this? I need to talk to whoever is in charge. A panicked assistant replied, Ma'am, they aren't responding. They have locked all communication channels. Madison froze, as if someone had just pulled the air out of her lungs. Locked all. The assistant nodded. All of them. Richard Fairbanks, Madison's husband, and the CEO of Fairbanks Group, was furiously calling the board, but the more he dialed, the paler he became, veins bulging at his temples. We are losing capital A, massive amount. Why can't anyone stop this? A financial advisor, pale as a sheet, whispered a sentence that plunged the entire room into dead silence. Because the one withdrawing is the one with ultimate authority. Richard's jaw dropped. Meaning Naomi Carter has the right to pull funding any time without notice. Madison's knees buckled. A teardrop ran down her cheek, sliding through smeared makeup left over from the gala, though she did not notice. She only felt a truth tightening around her throat. No, it was just a small joke, Madison mumbled. It was just cake. But no one answered her, because they knew it was never just cake. Back in Manhattan, Naomi stood by the glass wall overlooking the city and told Jordan check their audit reports again. Jordan handed her a folder. Naomi opened the first page, the red numbers glaring back like streaks of blood. They hid debt, Jordan nodded. 4.2 billion. They used the charity funds to plug financial holes. If this leaks, not if, Naomi cut in. Tonight everything will leak. She lifted her gaze, and in her eyes burned a conviction no insult or thrown cake could shake. I should have done this 3 months ago, Naomi said each word, hitting the marble floor like weighty stone. But I wanted to give them a chance. Jordan exhaled, and they threw cake at that chance. Naomi allowed herself a faint smile, not of amusement, but the smile of someone who had stopped forgiving. Exactly. In the Fairbanks penthouse, the final call Richard could make returned a cold message: access denied. He slammed his hand on the table. She cannot be allowed to destroy my entire corporation. But another advisor voice, shaking, replied, No, sir. She is not destroying it. She is only taking back the capital that you once begged for." Madison held her head, tears streaming. "If I apologize, if I explain, will she forgive me?" The room went silent. After a long moment, the eldest advisor spoke, his voice, hoarse, tired, but brutally honest. "No one humiliates a woman like Naomi Carter and expects her to forget." As night edged toward dawn, Manhattan still glowed brightly, but two worlds were moving in opposite directions. On one side was Naomi calm, precise, decisive, conducting the symphony of an empire's undoing. On the other was the Fairbanks family, panicked, stumbling through desperate calls, slow regret, and a fear deeper than anything they had ever imagined. And when the clock struck 3 in the morning, the system confirmed the final order. Carter Capital had withdrawn every dollar. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, her voice soft as breath, but powerful as judgment. "It is time they understood," she said. "Respect is not a privilege. It is a condition." Across the city, Madison Fairbanks collapsed onto the cold marble floor and whispered between shaking hands, "What have I done?" But the answer was already painfully clear. She had thrown cake at the only woman in the room who could erase her entire empire with a single touch of a screen. Dawn had not yet touched Manhattan, but the 40th floor of Carter Capital was already lit up like a technological fortress preparing to launch fire. Screens in the operations room flashed non-stop red alerts, racing across them like electrical currents pushed to their limits. Naomi Carter stood before the glass wall, watching the city still wrapped in mist, her long hair tied neatly behind her, her smile soft as vapor, while her eyes remained cold as steel, sliding across a blade. She had just lived through the longest night she had faced in months, yet not a hint of exhaustion showed on her face. Her clarity did not come from sleep, but from a purpose so unshakable it seemed to be carved into her bones. Jordan Lee stepped in, clutching a tablet, vibrating with dozens of alerts. "Naomi, we have news. Serious news. Fairbanks Group's automated systems are starting to collapse." Naomi did not turn around. She simply asked severity. Jordan's fingers moved quickly. Corporate accounts locked. Banks are demanding proof of liquidity within 24 hours. Dependent funds have lost their operating capital in the last 90 minutes. Naomi nodded lightly. "Proceed." She spoke the two words that would terrify any executive, but for her, they were merely confirmation that everything was moving exactly where it needed to go. Down on the street, reporters were gathering in front of the Fairbanks Group headquarters. Camera flashes burst repeatedly. Wind whipped through the promotional banner, showing Richard and Madison Fairbanks smiling brightly in their Give Love Forward campaign. Now that smile looked ridiculous, like a mask that no longer fit the faces of a power couple coming apart at the seams. Inside the Fairbanks building, chaos had reached its peak. Department heads all shouted into their phones, but every call began with the same question. What is happening with the investment from Carter Capital? And no one had an answer. Richard Fairbanks slammed his hand onto the conference table, spilling black coffee across the surface. There is no way she actually did this. This is a system, glitch, a technical error. But then he froze as an assistant handed him a phone, showing a bank notification. Withdrawal confirmed by controlling partner Naomi Carter. Reason ethical breach of partnership terms. Richard went white. What Madison, who had rushed into the office after a sleepless night, face ashen like cold ash, snatched the phone from his hand. When she read the line, her legs nearly gave out. She wrote a reason. She spelled it out. There were cameras at the Gala. The assistant whispered, voice trembling. The video. It's going viral. TikTok, Instagram, everywhere. An IT staffer ran in panting. Madame #CakeGate is #1 right now. Madison felt as if someone had slapped her across the face. CakeGate. Yes, the staffer replied. The clip of you throwing cake at Naomi is being shared at an insane speed. Inside Carter Capital's control room, Jordan pulled up the viral clip for Naomi. The footage showed Madison holding the cake knife, laughing loudly, smearing frosting onto Naomi's shoulder, followed by the crowd's harsh laughter. Naomi watched for only a few seconds, then said, "Turn it off." Jordan blinked. "You don't want to see it, no need," Naomi replied, eyes returning to the skyline. The event said everything already. I don't need to hear their laughter again. The first rays of sunlight touched her face, casting a warm orange glow that matched the dress she had worn the night before. But now that color was no longer the shade of humiliation. It was the color of a new dawn. Across Manhattan, Madison sank into a chair, hands covering her face. "We have to call Naomi. Now. I'll explain. I'll apologize. Richard cut her off, voice heavy as stone. You think she'll listen?" Madison looked up at him, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean it. It was just a moment, just a joke." Richard slammed the table again. "You insulted the wrong person. You joked with the wrong person. Naomi Carter is not someone you can mock and expect to forgive you. Like the girls at those cheap charity luncheons." Madison broke down, crying, but her tears were as useless as a drop of water falling on desert sand. Meanwhile, Naomi took her first call from another major conglomerate. Jordan relayed the message. "They want to stand with us. They want to support you. They want to pull out from Fairbanks, too." Naomi answered simply, "Not yet." "You don't want them affected?" Jordan asked. Naomi shook her head. "No, because we don't need them. This storm belongs to Fairbanks, and this storm is a lesson they must face alone." Then Naomi walked to the central operations table. Updated audit report. Jordan handed it to her. Red numbers stretched across the pages like deep wounds. Bad debts, concealed transactions funds, disguised under charitable labels. Naomi placed her hand on the final page, where the total liabilities were recorded, $4.2 billion. "They thought they could hide this from me," Naomi whispered. "But justice is not something you can blindfold." "Do you want to release this report?" Jordan asked. Naomi shook her head. "No, not yet." "Why?" "Because they will release it themselves, out of desperation." And just as she predicted at Fairbanks headquarters, frantic lawyers burst into the main hall shouting, "We need to open the reports now. If we don't disclose them, the banks will cut us off." Madison stood still. Her tears stopped mid-flow. She understood. Her life was turning to dust. "Naomi," she whispered, "please hear me." But Naomi Carter heard none of the crying echoing through glass towers. She simply looked down at the city, a city that once praised the Fairbanks name, now preparing to watch their downfall, the way people watch fireworks on Independence Day. And then Naomi said the sentence Jordan would remember forever, when someone chooses cruelty over respect. Then what Jordan asked. Naomi closed her eyes, briefly opened them, her gaze sharp as a blade. Then the world teaches them the cost. And that sunrise, the sunrise marking the moment the Fairbanks empire began to crack, would be remembered forever as the morning when a woman who had frosting smeared across her shoulder rose and erased an entire empire using nothing but a silence sharper than any retaliation. The bad news spread like fire, sweeping through dry forest, and before 10 in the morning, all of Manhattan was flooded with emergency alerts about Carter Capital's withdrawal, while Fairbanks Group stood on the edge of collapse in just a few hours. But in the center of that media storm, Naomi Carter sat in her 38th floor office with a calm so steady it made those around her even more frightened of her ability to control herself. She leaned slightly forward, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the news screen, showing hundreds of reporters swarming the Fairbanks building, like vultures circling a dying giant. Jordan rushed in, hair tied hastily, breath uneven. Naomi, they're holding a press conference. The live stream numbers are exploding. Naomi didn't turn. She simply said, "Put it on." The large screen flickered to life with footage of a chaotic briefing room. Madison Fairbanks sat in the middle row of seats, her face stripped of all the glamorous makeup from the Gala hair, disheveled eyes, swollen red from sleepless nights and endless tears. Richard stood beside her, his expression hardened as he tried to hold on to the image of leadership, but his voice shook as he spoke into the microphone. We are facing a severe financial disruption caused by a misunderstanding with our investor, Carter Capital, but he didn't even finish the sentence. The room erupted with aggressive shouts from reporters. "Do you have any comment about the cake incident last night? Was there discriminatory behavior at the gala? Was Naomi Carter the target? Did Fairbanks misuse charity funds to cover debt? Is the $4.2 billion debt figure accurate?" Questions fired at them like arrows, sharp and merciless. Madison broke down, crying, live on the air across dozens of the biggest news networks in the country. Richard tried to steady her with a hand on her shoulder, but his own fingers trembled. We are cooperating with our banking partners to resolve this. Please give us time." The press roared again. Did Carter Capital withdraw because of Madison's behavior? Does Mrs. Fairbanks have an official apology? Madison reached for the microphone, voice hoarse and fractured. "I didn't mean to. It was just a joke," a reporter cut in. "A joke worth $4.2 billion, Madison choked, her shoulders collapsing as if struck through the chest. On the 38th floor, Naomi watched it without gloating and without pity, only with a cold silence, the silence of justice. Naomi Jordan said softly, "Do you want to respond to the media? They're requesting interviews non-stop." Naomi rose to her feet, each step slow, yet certain, like a commander, walking out from a victory that didn't need drums or applause. "No, I don't need to speak. They will understand." Jordan looked at Naomi the way one might stare at a storm forming inside a human form. "What should I prepare?" Naomi gazed down at the street, a Manhattan loud and restless, yet in this moment suspended between two breaths. "Prepare the car. We're going to Fairbanks Tower." Jordan blinked in shock. "You want to go there?" "Right now." Naomi nodded. "Yes. I need to see with my own eyes the foundation they built out of arrogance." 20 minutes later, a black Maybach pulled onto the avenue. When Naomi stepped out of the car, the chaotic crowd in front of the Fairbanks building fell silent for a full heartbeat. People parted automatically to make way for her, as if reacting instinctively to a presence they had always feared, but never fully seen. A reporter recognized her first. Naomi Carter. The shout cracked open the dam. Instantly, hundreds of microphones, cameras, and flashing lights surged toward her. "Ms. Carter, are you here to confirm the withdrawal? Do you have a message for the Fairbanks family? Was the cake incident the reason the deal collapsed? Were you insulted last night? Naomi did not pause for a second. She walked straight up the stone steps to the main doors of Fairbanks Tower. The flashes burst like fireworks, but none of it touched the still commanding expression on her face. Standing beneath the cracked Fairbanks logo, Naomi turned to Jordan. "Open the file." Jordan handed her a tablet. Naomi stepped toward the central microphone, her voice resonating with steady, undeniable force. "I will say this once." The crowd held its breath. Reporters who had been screaming moments earlier fell into absolute silence. Carter Capital did not withdraw because of a cake, Naomi said slowly. Not because of emotion, not because of retaliation. A breeze swept through her hair, making her long coat flow behind her, like the banner of a war whose rules were being rewritten. "We withdrew," she continued, "because we cannot work with an organization that places arrogance above ethics, a place willing to conceal debt, misuse charitable funds, and treat humiliating others as entertainment." The crowd shook with shock. Naomi looked up at the building's glass facade, cracked from the pressure of the past hours, and delivered the sentence that would echo through the entire financial sector. "I did not destroy their empire. I simply took back what was mine." A reporter blurted out, "Do you have a message for Mrs. Madison Fairbanks?" Naomi stared directly into the lenses of hundreds of cameras, her eyes calm yet razor-sharp. Respect costs nothing. But when someone refuses to give it the price they pay is beyond anything they can afford. Jordan, standing behind her, felt a chill crawl down his spine. The reporters erupted in a torrent of questions, but Naomi turned away, leaving the crowd in a storm of fear, awe, and helpless admiration. And on the upper floors inside the luxury conference room, where Madison watched the live stream, she collapsed into sobs like a child, her hands trembling violently, whispering. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to fight. She just said a few words. Richard stood behind her in silence, voice cracking, and those few words buried us. But Naomi knew something they didn't. This was only the surface of the earthquake. The aftershocks ahead were stronger, deeper, and far more devastating, ready to sweep away whatever Fairbanks still believed they could salvage. Because any empire built on arrogance always collapses from within. Naomi Carter merely pulled the curtain aside so the world could see it happen. As Naomi Carter's speech spread across Manhattan like a bolt of lightning, Fairbanks Tower became the center of every camera and every wave of outrage on social media. But while millions replayed each frame of the cake humiliation, none of them knew an even larger crisis was unfolding behind the glass walls of a corporation once considered untouchable. At 9:17 in the morning, the Fairbanks Group system sent an emergency notice to all employees. Temporary access locked. Full company meeting in 15 minutes. Instantly departments erupted into panic. Dozens of employees opened their laptops only to find they could not log into internal accounts. Financial documents disappeared from servers, and bright red error messages filled their screens. A financial analyst shouted in shock, "They locked all API access. We can't reach any transaction data." Another employee went pale. Even the backup accounts are locked. Inside the executive room, Richard Fairbanks tore off his tie and paced violently across the space that only last night had been filled with champagne toasts and smug congratulations. Now the table was littered with reports, spilled coffee and crumpled papers. "Find me anyone at Carter Capital," Richard roared. "A consultant, an assistant, a temp worker, anyone who can get us a meeting," but no one could. Every email returned the same cold message. Mailbox not available. Calls went unanswered or rang endlessly into nothing. Madison stood beside him, hollow-eyed, whispering, "Maybe I can go see her." Face to face. "I'll apologize." Richard spun around, his voice sharp as broken glass. "Do you think Naomi Carter is someone you can just knock on the door and beg? You turned her into the biggest enemy this family has ever faced." His hand shook with rage and fear, while Madison could only cover her face and cry. But tears had lost all power now. Meanwhile, at Carter Capital, Naomi sat in a small conference room with Jordan and the strategy team. There was no tension, no anger, no triumph. Everything was quiet, calculated, controlled. Jordan reported the leak about the $4.2 billion debt hit the press. Major banks are preparing investigations. Fairbanks stock dropped another 26%. Rumor has it they'll shut down their European branch. Naomi turned a page of the report, her voice steady. "That's not a rumor. That is the inevitable result." A young analyst stared at her, awe mixing with disbelief. "You didn't say a word publicly, but you brought an entire corporation to its knees in 12 hours. How can you stay so calm?" Naomi placed her hand on the table, a faint smile appearing barely visible. "Because I'm not doing this to win. I'm doing this to correct a wrong." Jordan lowered his head, as if he had just heard a truth deeper than strategy. Naomi then stood and announced, "We will no longer interfere with the media. Let the truth speak." No one realized yet that Naomi's silence was the sharpest blow of all a form of power that made opponents collapse without a single hand raised against them. Back at Fairbanks Tower, chaos consumed every floor. Senior employees squeezed into the elevators, heading to the 32nd floor for the full company meeting. When the doors opened, a sea of panicked faces stared toward the stage. Richard stepped forward, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We are experiencing a temporary disruption." Carter Capital misunderstood. A voice from the crowd cut him off. "Misunderstood enough to pull every dollar overnight. Did you hide the $4.2 billion debt? What did Mrs. Madison do at the gala? Did she insult Naomi Carter?" Madison froze behind the curtains as the fury poured toward her. She gripped the edge of a table to stay standing, but her hands shook violently. A female employee stepped forward, anger flashing in her eyes. "I saw the video. That was blatant disrespect." "Who did you think she was?" Some unknown guest. Madison could only stammer 2 broken words. I'm sorry." But the apology vanished into the void. In the back of the room, several employees whispered fiercely, "Naomi Carter isn't just anyone. She's the reason Fairbanks survived the last 3 years. Without her, their charitable foundations would have collapsed ages ago, and they treated her like a joke." Richard shouted, "Everyone be quiet. This is not our fault. This is only—" But he never finished his sentence. The giant screen behind him flickered on, automatically showing Naomi standing before Fairbanks Tower earlier that morning, delivering the line that had shaken the entire nation. Respect costs nothing. But when someone refuses to give it the price they pay, will be beyond anything they can afford. The entire hall fell silent. Madison collapsed into a chair. Richard stood frozen, and they all understood the Fairbanks empire no longer belonged to them. Back at Carter Capital, Jordan approached Naomi as she was preparing to leave her office. "Naomi, you truly don't want to say anything more, to tell your side of the story, to expose them." Naomi put on her coat and turned to him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of a generational lesson. When someone seeks justice for revenge, they may win for a moment. But when someone seeks justice to restore balance, they change the entire system. She stepped into the elevator, adding one final line that echoed through the corridor. I don't need them to know I'm right. I only need them to stop being wrong. The elevator doors slid shut, and at that exact moment, several blocks away, the Fairbanks Tower system sent its final notice to all employees. The corporation is officially insolvent. Prepare for emergency disclosure to banks and federal investigators. Manhattan shook. The nation erupted. And at the center of that quake, Naomi Carter did not smile in victory, because she knew revenge satisfies, but justice changes the world, and she had chosen justice. By 2 p.m, Manhattan felt as if it were holding its breath at the center of an unforeseen earthquake. Fairbanks Tower now looked like the hull of the Titanic after hitting an iceberg, its glass walls reflecting the panicked faces of employees, while reporters pushed and shoved outside the lobby, and the LED panels flashed a single red line, suspended operations emergency. The air was so chaotic that even a fresh intern could smell the burn of fear, greed, and arrogance collapsing all at once. In the conference room on the 32nd floor, Madison Fairbanks had lost every trace of the pride that once defined her reign over upper-class galas. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks like the remains of a mask peeling off. She curled in on herself, fingers gripping the corner of a silk scarf as if it were the last scrap of dignity she still owned. But when the family's private attorney pushed through the doors, his face ashen the folder in his shaking hands. Madison knew everything had just fallen another layer into hell. Madison Richard the attorney said, his voice cracked. The Securities Commission has ordered an emergency investigation. Without transparent proof of your charity fund sources, we will face criminal charges for fraud. Richard shouted, Impossible. We only moved the funds temporarily to cover gaps. It's standard procedure. The attorney shook his head, his tone cutting straight through Richard's delusion. You transferred $41 million from the Orphan Support Fund into an offshore account to hide debt. A blow. A truth that could not be denied. Madison whipped around to her husband. You did what Richard snapped. I did it to save this family. To save the empire you wear like a cloak of power. Madison jumped to her feet. So all of this is your fault, not mine. Richard let out a bitter laugh. No. Your fault began the moment you threw cake at the one woman who could save us. The sentence dropped into the room like a gunshot. Madison collapsed back into a chair, mouth open, unable to speak. All the years she hid behind arrogance now closed in on her like starving wolves. But the worst part she knew. Richard was right. Outside the conference room, dozens of senior employees gathered beneath a giant screen, replaying Naomi Carter's speech in front of Fairbanks Tower. Respect costs nothing. Naomi's voice echoed like a bell, forcing everyone to confront their own reflection. But when someone refuses to give it the price they pay, will be beyond anything they can afford. Some employees lowered their heads. Some sighed heavily. Some quietly deleted their email accounts from the internal system as if preparing to abandon a Titanic that was visibly sinking. Meanwhile, at Carter Capital, Naomi reviewed the newest report from Jordan. They've lost 72% of their market value in just 4 hours, Jordan said softly. 3 banks have halted support. Internal shareholders are starting to dump their shares. Naomi set the report down and gazed out the window. The afternoon sunlight fell across her hair in a warm golden glow, but in her eyes was a calm free of hatred, ego, or triumph. It was simply clarity. Jordan asked, "You're not happy?" Naomi shook her head. "Jordan, people don't become strong because they get revenge. They become strong because they learn when to let go." Jordan stayed silent for a long moment before murmuring, "You just altered the business culture of this entire city." Naomi replied, "No, they changed it themselves when they were forced to face their consequences. But the battle wasn't over. It was about to reach its most bitter moment. Because at that exact time, Naomi's phone lit up with an incoming video call from Madison Fairbanks. Jordan looked at her startled. "Do you want to answer?" Naomi's voice did not waver. "Put it through." The screen came alive. Madison appeared collapsed, stripped of all glamour, her face shadowed with despair. Behind her, Richard argued with a financial advisor, the sound of fists hitting the table echoing now and then. Madison cried, her pride shattering like glass. "Naomi, please listen to me just once." Naomi leaned back in her chair, her eyes cold as a winter lake, but free of malice. "I'm listening," Madison sobbed. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted the party to be fun. I didn't know who you were." Naomi answered softly. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is you believed you had the right to treat anyone like that." Madison covered her face. "I'm sorry, I truly am." Naomi looked directly at the screen, delivering each word with crystal clarity. "I accept your apology." Madison gasped with relief until Naomi added, "But I will not undo the consequences." Madison froze. "Naomi, please give us time. Give us a chance." Naomi cut in her tone, low but dignified. "A chance I already gave you, a chance. When I invested, when I trusted your principles, when I stayed silent through the early signs of misconduct. But last night you threw that chance in my face." Madison cried harder. "I'm begging you, thousands of people work for us. If the company collapses," Naomi closed her eyes, briefly exhaled. "Madison, your company collapses not because of me. It collapses because what you built was rotten from the start." Madison choked, unable to speak. Naomi delivered the final line that made even Jordan hold his breath. "I did not destroy your empire. I simply stopped holding it up." The screen went dark. Silence filled the room. Jordan whispered, "You just ended them?" Naomi replied lightly calmly, "No. They ended themselves." And as the sun dipped behind the skyscrapers, Naomi Carter walked down the glass corridor, her silhouette stretching across the polished floor, like the shadow of a queen crossing a battlefield she never needed to fight on. Because sometimes the greatest power is standing still and letting the truth speak for itself. A faint smile touched Naomi's lips. Not a smile of victory, but the smile of someone who understood that when justice awakens, it carries the work all the way to the end. As sunset draped itself over Manhattan, the sky deepened into a dark orange hue. The same shade as the dress Naomi wore the night before, the one smeared with cake, but now that color no longer symbolized humiliation. It glowed like the quiet fire of rebirth. And in that moment, while the city roared with the biggest financial scandal of the year, Naomi Carter stepped into one of the most important decisions of her life, not to destroy, but to rebuild. At Carter Capital, Jordan Lee entered the conference room, eyes wide. "Naomi, you need to see this." She handed over a tablet showing Fairbanks Tower, swarmed by employees streaming out with cardboard boxes and bags, some crying, others cursing management. One man told reporters, "For years we suspected they were misusing charity funds," but no one dared speak up. A woman sobbed. If it wasn't for Naomi Carter, this truth would have stayed buried forever. Naomi frowned lightly, not out of sympathy for Fairbanks, but out of sorrow for those harmed by their greed. "Jordan," she said, her voice soft but weighted, "prepare the announcement." Jordan hesitated. Announcement of what Naomi turned the tablet around, revealing a document she had drafted 3 years earlier, but never implemented, the Lillian Carter Foundation, a scholarship and community support fund for underprivileged youth. Jordan's breath caught. "You're planning to use the entire $4.2 billion, Naomi nodded. "All of it." Jordan was stunned, yet not surprised, because she knew Naomi had never cared about power for display. She cared about using it to mend what the world had broken. Naomi walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the chaotic city below. "Fairbanks built an empire on arrogance," she said. "I'll build a legacy on kindness." Meanwhile, at the Fairbanks penthouse, Madison and Richard sat in darkness, lit only by the red warning lights flashing across their financial dashboards. Madison stared at her phone, at the final message Naomi had sent. "I accept your apology, but I will not undo the consequences," Madison whispered through trembling hands. "She didn't destroy us. She just stopped holding us up." Richard said nothing. He stared through the window where reporters gathered below, camera flashes striking upward like knives. Everything they once flaunted, power, prestige, empire, had been reduced to negative numbers and allegations. At that same time, an unexpected press conference began at Carter Capital. Naomi stepped onto the stage in a tailored orange suit, the same shade that had become her new symbol, not of shame, but of declaration, "I am still standing." No dramatic backdrop, no oversized logos, just a simple podium, and the golden rose emblem of the Lillian Carter Foundation. The room fell silent. Naomi took the microphone, her voice low but precise. "Last night something happened that made many question power, dignity, and consequence. But true power does not lie in how we react to humiliation. It lies in what we choose to do afterward." Dozens of cameras clicked. Naomi continued, "Carter Capital will reallocate the full $4.2 billion once intended for Fairbanks Group into the Lillian Carter Foundation to support the next generation and open doors for those who never had access to the rooms I stood in last night." The room held its breath. Naomi added her voice, soft yet resonant, like a morning bell I did not take from them. "I simply returned that money to those who deserve it more." That day, social media exploded. No one talked about the cake anymore. They talked about the reallocation, about justice without brutality, about a woman who did not scream, did not retaliate with venom, but turned the slap life had given her into a doorway for thousands of young lives. Across the city, Madison Fairbanks watched the live broadcast, her heart tearing between admiration and bitterness. "She turned that night into light," Madison whispered, tears streaming, "and I turned it into a stain." Naomi never heard those words. She only stood on the rooftop of Carter Capital, the night wind brushing through her hair. The city below, a noisy, relentless Manhattan, full of opportunity and untold stories, reflected in her eyes like an ocean of possibility. And in the vastness of that moment, Naomi whispered to herself, "Justice is not a scream. Justice is a light." And that night, Manhattan witnessed a truth: some empires fall because of arrogance. But some legacies begin with a smear of white frosting on the shoulder of a woman who knew she deserved far more than that. The next morning, As the sun rose above the Manhattan skyline, the entire city seemed wrapped in a haze of breaking news. Newspapers, television networks, and social media all blazed with headlines. Fairbanks Group officially insolvent, Securities Commission launches investigation, $4.2 billion reallocated into the decade's largest scholarship fund. At Carter Capital, Naomi Carter walked into her office with a calmness that made it seem as though she had just wrapped up a light internal meeting rather than orchestrating one of the largest financial reallocations in recent history. As she pushed open the door, every employee rose to their feet. No applause, no cheers. They simply stood silent, heads lowered in respect. A respect not born from fear, but from witnessing the strength of dignity used the right way. Jordan approached. "Naomi, you need to see this." She handed over a media report. On the cover was a photo of Naomi standing against the city skyline, her orange blazer glowing under the light with the headline, "Power isn't loud. It realigns." Naomi offered a faint smile, not at the fame, but because she knew the message was spreading exactly as it should. Jordan continued, "Universities want to partner with the Lillian Carter Foundation. Teens from the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, all sending thank you videos. And the media, they're calling you the woman redefining justice." Naomi set the report down. "No one redefines justice. I'm just clearing the path so it can go where it belongs. But elsewhere in the city, inside a cold penthouse, stripped of its former glory, the lives of those who once stood at the top were in freefall." Madison Fairbanks sat on the sofa, her eyes empty, staring into nothing. Her phone vibrated non-stop, each call bringing more threats of lawsuits, more demands for repayment, more public fallout. Richard walked in, shirt wrinkled, looking a decade older after just one night. "The Securities Commission is waiting," he said, voice hollow. "They want every charity transaction, all of them." Madison pressed her lips together, though her palms were ice cold. "I didn't know things were this bad." Richard looked at her anger and despair tangled in his eyes. "No, you knew. You just never believed it would come back to bite you." Madison trembled. "Do you think if I met Naomi again, if I got on my knees and apologized, she might?" Richard cut her off with a broken laugh. "Naomi Carter is not the type who buys an apology with staged tears, and you know that." Back at Carter Capital, Naomi opened an email from a 15-year-old girl. "Ms. Naomi, I used to think I'd never get the chance to go to college, but now I believe I can. Thank you for standing up so girls like me can step into rooms we once only watched from afar." Naomi read each line slowly, feeling as if someone had placed a warm light in her chest. Jordan, standing beside her, whispered, This is why you did it right." Naomi answered without hesitation, "Yes. Justice is not only about punishing wrongdoing. It's about returning opportunities someone thought they'd never reach." Outside Fairbanks Tower, a group of newly unemployed workers spoke to reporters. A middle-aged man said, "We don't blame Naomi Carter. We blame the leadership that forced her to pull out." A young woman added, "Without her, the truth about the fraud would have stayed buried forever. Their words spread faster than any scandal." Madison watched them all. Every sentence felt like another blade, slicing through the wall of arrogance she once believed was unbreakable. But what broke her completely was not the lawsuits, not the investigations, not the headlines. It was the moment she saw the Lillian Carter Foundation logo appear on a massive digital billboard, the same spot where the Fairbanks Foundation's logo once stood, a golden rose blooming against a black background, with the words, "Dignity is a seed. Give it light, it will grow, Madison wept. Not because she lost money, but because Naomi had transformed the very thing she used to humiliate her into a symbol of hope. At that same moment, Naomi returned to her penthouse. She opened a small box Jordan had left the night before. Inside was a tiny sugar flower, identical to the decoration on the cake thrown at her. Naomi placed it beside her grandmother's photograph. "You see, Grandma," she whispered, "even wounds can bloom if we choose the right way." Outside the late afternoon, light fell over Manhattan like a soft ribbon, illuminating the face of a woman who had turned insult into momentum cruelty, into justice, and a single cake into the beginning of a new legacy. And in that moment, Naomi understood that although the Fairbanks empire had fallen, something far stronger was rising in its place, steady, unshakable, untouchable faith in human dignity. 1 week after the earthquake called Cake Gate, when Manhattan had finally begun to settle, and breaking news had been replaced by fresher headlines, Naomi Carter stood on the rooftop of the new Lillian Carter Foundation headquarters, the building that once belonged to the Fairbanks Foundation. The old signage had been taken down, but Naomi chose to keep one section of the wall where the Fairbanks logo had been carved, not to humiliate them, but to preserve it as a scar of history, something future generations needed to see. The stone still held the scratches of time, the quiet reminder of an empire that collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. Below, dozens of teenagers gathered for the first orientation of the scholarship program. Bright faces, excited voices, eyes glowing like the first rays of morning. Naomi stepped down to the rows of seats, standing before them, without a podium, without distance, just a woman, speaking to young people who once believed the world was too vast and too far out of reach. Today, Naomi began her voice warm and steady. "You are not standing before an opportunity that was handed to you. You are standing before an opportunity you've always deserved." A girl raised her hand. "Ms. Naomi, what made you decide to use all that money for us?" Naomi smiled, her eyes softening. "Because no one should ever live in a world where cruelty is treated as a privilege. And because I believe when you plant a seed in the right place, the future will bloom." The room fell silent. Then applause rose, not loud or showy, but so genuine that Naomi felt her throat sting. In the corner, Jordan watched with her arms folded, pride shining in her eyes. Naomi looked toward her. "Prepare for the next project announcement." Jordan nodded. "Universities are waiting. They want to launch the program nationwide." Naomi took a deep breath. The exhaustion lingered, but it did not slow her. Because she understood her greatest achievement was not pulling $4.2 billion out of an arrogant corporation, but redirecting its path entirely. On the other side of the city, in painful contrast to the hope filling that room, the Fairbanks penthouse had been partially sealed. The once luxurious white walls now felt like an empty shell. Madison sat in the living room, dark circles under her eyes, staring at the silent phone. No calls except from lawyers and media looking for more scandal. Richard walked past, his eyes vacant. The two of them were no longer symbols of power. They were simply two people who had just learned the most expensive lesson of their lives. Madison stared at her hands and whispered, "I spent my whole life trying to stand above others. And in the end, all I did was make myself fall." Richard replied, his voice rough, "Because you forgot what Naomi never forgot. Power isn't for display, it's for protection. But lessons learned too late cannot save anyone." Back at Carter Capital, Naomi finished her meeting and stepped onto the balcony to look down at the city. The evening breeze carried the scent of a New York constantly reshaping itself, loud, complicated, but always ready to give new chances to those who dared to turn their pain into action. Jordan joined her. "Do you think it's all over?" Naomi shook her head slightly. "No. Justice doesn't end. It continues in everyone who learns to value themselves." Jordan smiled faintly. "I still can't believe everything started because of a cake." Naomi let out a soft laugh, the kind Jordan only heard when Naomi truly relaxed. "No, Jordan. It didn't start because of the cake. It started because someone thought they had the right to throw it." Evening settled, and the lights across the city flickered to life, like thousands of candles greeting a new day for those who were lifted up and bidding farewell to a fallen era built on arrogance. Naomi walked back inside, stopping before her grandmother's photograph on a wooden table. "Grandma," she whispered, "I only did what you taught me. Stand tall when you're pushed down, and lift others when you can." Down on the street, a massive billboard suddenly lit up. The Lillian Carter Foundation logo glowed against the night sky, with the words, "Justice doesn't punish, it elevates." Naomi looked up, and in her eyes shone something brighter than all the lights of Manhattan, an unshakable belief that she hadn't just changed one story. She had changed the direction of the stories that would be told from here on. And so, on the final night of a turbulent week, the city understood one truth. There are people who don't need to win to prove their strength. They only need to stand in the right place and let the light shine through them. From the perspective of a specialist in organizational culture and the ethics of power, Naomi Carter's story reminds us that true strength does not come from raised voices or fierce retaliation. It comes from the calm of someone who understands that dignity is not decoration, it is the foundation of every partnership, every relationship, and every system. Naomi did not choose revenge, she chose reconstruction. She did not choose to tear others down, she chose to lift others up. And that choice drew a clear line between two worlds, one an empire built on arrogance and concealment collapsing under the sound of its own laughter. The other, a legacy built on justice and human dignity, standing firm, shining brighter, and carving out new paths for thousands who never had a chance before. This is not just a story about finance or power. It is a lesson in the truth that when an organization disregards human dignity, it is pulling out the very foundation beneath itself. And when one individual dares to stand up at the right moment, the entire system is forced to change. If this journey resonates with you, please like and subscribe to help spread the values that matter. Values the world needs now more than ever. Before you leave the video, comment exactly 3 words. Hold your dignity.